due next class, so I thought I would take a moment now to talk about it, elaborate about the assignment, and answer any questions you might have. The assignment, if you haven't looked at the syllabus, is to propose a way to do a project that would provide an answer to the question of whether people are more emotional when they're tired. And the question is deliberately vague. That is, there are lots of different meanings of tired, there are lots of different meanings of emotional, there are lots of different ways of creating or taking advantage of different levels of tiredness, and lots of different ways of measuring each of the various emotions. And it's deliberately vague so that you can each write a paper unique to you, tuned to your own desires. And one way to think about this paper is to actually wonder about the question. That is, it's not an unreasonable question. Are people more emotional when they're tired? And when you wonder about that, you will have some notion of what that question means. That is, if you work in a preschool, you might think, gosh, there is more crying right before nap time than right after nap time. Or you might think, best not to have difficult discussions with your friends and family or your partner late at night, because people tend to get carried away emotionally when they're tired. Save those discussions for the morning when people are less emotional. So all of those sorts of notions are already suggesting experiments or studies that you can do. That is, rarely do you have the thought, like, I have noticed that when people are kept awake for a week in the lab, they tend to cry more at sad movies. That is, that may be true, but that's not your observation, and that is, to some extent, a less interesting version of the question. That's what you want to know is this really true in the world? That is, if I were performing in a comedy club and I wanted people to laugh, would it be a good idea to do it late in the evening or earlier when people are less tired and more willing to express humor or feel amused? So that's a way to think about it. What are the real meanings of that question? Then how would you go about testing it? You can do it either experimentally. That is, you can induce different levels of fatigue in people, mental fatigue, physical fatigue, sleep deprivation fatigue, and so on. Or you can take advantage, that is, do it experimentally, of the fact that sometimes people are more tired than they are at other times. So preschoolers right before nap time are more tired than preschoolers right after nap time. That would be a non-experimental approach. Because shift workers can be more tired when they're shifted to the night shift, to use the word shift, than people who work the regular day shift. That again would be a non-experimental approach. Here's a group of people that's likely to be tired. Here's a group of similar people, except that they're not tired. Or experimental, induce fatigue in one way or another. Then on the emotion side, that's our independent variable. On the emotion side, you want to think, what emotion is it that you're interested in? And how do you normally observe that emotion in people? That is, you could do it with a survey, but again, this is a rare way to assess your friend's emotions. That is, when you think, wow, you're really angry, you're not thinking that of your friend who said, oh, just on a Likert 7-point scale, you check the 5 box. Instead, there are cathedral manifestations of emotion, and you might think about what those are. Are there ways, if you're trying to assess anger, that you can see it? Sadness, amusement, jealousy, envy, regret, euphoria, disgust, etc. What are the manifestations of those, and how can you create a measure in your study that captures that? Now, in terms of the methodological nuances, you got an email from 2/3 of the TAs indicating that simplicity was a good idea, and I would reiterate that. That is, there are a million ways to write this paper. Just do one of them. That is, you want tired, not tired, measure that captures how emotional people are. Stop there. If you write a perfectly clear paper and you think, I'm going to add one tiny frill because I'm so confident if you have any uncertainty about the clarity of what you've done, don't make it more complicated. Make it clearer. You want to be unethical. So the question is, if you have to follow ethical standards, and the answer would be reasonable ethical standards. So you, and it again also should be reasonably practical. So you don't want to propose an experiment where we colonize an exoplanet where the day length is 36 hours instead of 24 hours, and then by shipping 100 random people to this planet for the rest of their lives. So you're not going to do that. But you can do things like keep people awake or make people do 8-hour versions of the GRE test and so on. So it's even if you think, I don't know if I can do this. If you wonder at all, then go ahead and do it. And again, since you're not paying for the experiments yourself, you can do experiments that would be costly, just don't make them ludicrously costly. Because propose the kind of thing that someone could possibly do. Note, by the way, you don't have to do it. You don't have to say why it would be valuable to do it. You don't have to pretend to have done it and say what the results would be. It should just be clear, if you did this, how would this answer the question that is proposed? Are there questions? Desperation? Yes?
I don't know if I misunderstood, but you mentioned that the emotion is the independent variable?
The level of fatigue is the independent variable, the emotion is the dependent variable.
Okay.
So you want to know, does level of emotion depend on level of fatigue? You can have either experimental or non-experimental independent variable. Questions about when the drop deadline is? Nothing? Okay, if thoughts occur to you, pop your hand up or come to office hours. So, I promised a little bit more on birth order last time. I was going to explain to the later born children who aren't smart enough to understand what I've been talking about so far, why it is that they are slightly less bright, on average, to be fair, than their older siblings. And let me stress that it is on average. So people's IQs center in roughly a normal distribution around 100. So the difference between firstborn and secondborn children is tiny. That is, there are lots and lots of secondborn children who are smarter than lots and lots of firstborn children. It's just that on average, the firstborn is a little tiny bit smarter. And this is true of almost all of things, right? Men are taller than women. On average, more than firstborns are smarter than secondborns. But again, there are lots of men who are shorter than lots of women. You just get a mean difference. Doesn't mean every firstborn is smarter than every secondborn. So why might it be? Does a later born want to say something and then we'll get the right answer? Later born want to stick up for later borns? Do I need to talk more slowly? Are there later born children here? Anyone, why might firstborns?
I feel like for firstborns, because that's like the parents' first kid, it puts a lot of time and energy into them.
You say care more.
Yeah.
So that would be consistent with the argument we made last time about affiliation, that parents rush to tend to firstborn children.
Also, I'm the older one, and I have a younger sister. My parents always used to get mad at me when I was little because I would answer for my little sister, and I would always know exactly what she wanted.
Right.
Not what she wanted.
Yeah, and so this is one of the arguments, essentially a combination of these two is the argument made, and we had his name before. So Robert Zients did some work on this, and his argument was that it had to do with the environment into which these siblings are born. So if you imagine that you are baby X, let's write down here the IQ of the environment into which you're born. So what your baby X, what's the IQ of your father? 100 on average. What's the IQ of your mother? 100. Because on average, your parents, sadly, are average. So the average IQ of the family into which you're born, I'll give you a moment, is 100. So you're born into an IQ of 100 family. Now imagine a couple of years later, your younger sibling is born. So there's now X is a 2 or 3 year old. You have 2 parents and X2. What's the IQ of X2's parents? Still 100. The fact that they had a second child doesn't necessarily mean they're done with it. What is, and now we're going to switch slightly from IQ, because IQ is actually age adjusted. So instead of calling it IQ, we're going to do a non-adjusted intelligence. So how smart is a 2-year-old? Moderately smart, very smart, average smartness, really stupid. The answer is really stupid. So age adjusted, the average 2-year-old is average. Not age adjusted, the average 2-year-old is really stupid, right? There's essentially no problem in the world you would go to a 2-year-old for the solution. Except, can you show me how to distill Cheerios in a person? So let's give this person an IQ at age 2 of, 10. That is, if you gave them a normal verbal IQ test, they'd get a 0. So we'll include some nonverbal components, so they get a few right. So what now is the IQ of the family into which X2 is born? Math is harder here. 7. Right? Because there are 2 really smart people, 1 stupid person, you add them all up to 10. The environment into which they're born has an average IQ now of 70. Meaning that this child, X2, spends its time exposed, smart person, stupid person. Right? So the time you spend here, you don't learn fascinating stuff. Right? This one can barely talk, can't reason, etc. Not a stimulating mental environment. So now let's wait a couple of years and have a 3rd child. Now you do have to start to wonder about the parents. So now we have one parent has an IQ of 100, other parent still has an IQ of 100. X1 is now slightly older, and IQ, or intelligence, has gone up a little bit. So let's say they're now a 4-year-old and they have an IQ of 30. X2 is now a 2-year-old and has an IQ of 10, at least that's what 2-year-olds have an IQ of. And now X3 is born into this family. Math, ready? 60. Right, so the X3's environment is even stupider than X2's environment. Talks to a smart person, talks to a smart person, talks to a not very smart person, and talks to a really stupid person. So the average interaction that this person had is with a stupider family. And you can see the more siblings there are, the worse the quality of the environment. Until the oldest sibling is old enough to reach an adult level of intelligence. That's when you no longer have to be age adjusting the IQ. And so this is the science argument that basically it's this gradual deterioration as more and more dumb children are added to the family in the quality of the intellectual environment of each sibling. And notice that similar to this other argument, that the first child gets lots of quality time from smart people. Second child gets some quality time from smart people and some from not smart people. Third one gets some quality time from smart people and then lots from not smart people. And gradually that erosion damages the IQ. Now it turns out there's one confound. Remember we talked before with birth order stuff, that the birth order was slightly confounded with family size. That is, small families had more firstborn children, proportionally, than large families. So firstborns are oversampling single-child families, two-child families. Laterborns are oversampling multi-sibling families. There's a similar, though slightly different, confound here that could contribute to a deterioration in the IQ of successive siblings. Anyone here? 1/60th of the grade. So it turns out, almost necessarily, parental age varies with serial position of the child. So your parents were younger when they had your older sibling, than when they had you. And it turns out younger parents have better DNA. That is, your parental DNA degrades with age, and so if they're older, when they conceive you, they give you inferior genetic material. And this is well known, in fact, that is, if you look at the risk of various genetic disorders, Down syndrome, for example, it goes up quite steeply towards the end with maternal age, and there are some effects likewise of paternal age. That is, older parents may just have worse children. How would you tell the difference between that explanation and this science explanation? That is, it doesn't matter when parents start having children, no matter when they start, their firstborn is when they're younger than when the later born is born.
I think what I was going to say is going to work, but if you have people who only have one kid and had their kid much older, and then compare it with the second-born child of people who had kids much younger.
Yeah, so what you can do essentially is standardize on parental age. So you can look at only 30-year-olds. Is the firstborn child of a 30-year-old smarter or less smart than the second-born child of a 30-year-old? So if you hold age constant, then age is no longer contributing to it. Turns out to be a slightly hard thing to do because different sorts of people have children later. The higher SES people tend to wait to have children, poorer people tend to have children earlier.
If they're a twin, the firstborn and being twins, is that affected as well?
Yeah, so twins would be a complication, right? You'd expect twins who are born into an environment with the stupidest possible sibling, right? That is, when you're first born, you have an IQ of 0, and so twins have one like that. They haven't actually looked at that, but it would be a prediction of the Zion's theory.
I was just curious, like, has there been studies about, like, when people freeze their, like, sperm or eggs? Has there been studies on that?
Of whether it degrades?
If that affects the
I don't know the answer to that one. The data on maternal age on child's DNA is clear. Paternal turns out to be much more subtle. But there still are effects that is much, much older fathers have more genetic anomalies in their children than younger ones. Okay, so that's some of the birth order stuff. Let me touch on one more thing. It was actually studied, he wrote a book about it called Born to Rebel by Frank Soloway, who is interested in birth order and one's embracing of revolutions. And his argument was, and it's an argument actually very similar to Shacker's, that firstborns should embrace the status quo and laterborns should embrace revolutionary ideas. Revolutionary ideas defined broadly. And the thought was, consistent with Shacker's, that firstborns essentially are born into a stable status quo niche. That is, they go into the family business, their parents love them and raise them carefully to be like them. The laterborns need to establish their own space. That is, they need to do something different to have room when the firstborn has occupied the default position. And so what Soloway suggested was firstborns should be radically different in all these ways from laterborns in political movements. And he went through thousands of biographies and autobiographies and memoirs and diaries looking for the relationship of birth order and things like embracing the French Revolution. That is, do you accept the status quo, that is the rule of Louis, or do you embrace the revolution? And the finding was firstborns embrace the status quo, that is, they don't think there should be an overthrow of the monarchy in France. Laterborns are more likely to do it. You can also look at intellectual revolutions, so something like Darwinism, which at the time, and to this day, was controversial. That is, the status quo was humans were created as they now are, some number of thousands of years ago, the radical Darwinian position, revolutionary Darwinian position, of course, was that basically we are just monkeys whose hair fell off. And the finding was firstborns reject Darwinism, embrace the status quo of creationist position. Laterborns are much more willing to accept this radical new position. And he did lots of work on this, and you can imagine it falling right out of the Schafter position. Okay, enough of Bergman. Let's talk about the main topics of the day, and we'll start with balance theory. When we were talking about social comparison, I suggested that Festinger's theory had to do with our desire to evaluate our opinions and beliefs. That is what we think reasonable? Is what we can do reasonable? And I suggested that it wasn't really designed to be an unbiased solicitation of others' opinions. That is, you don't want to know what does the average person think, or how does the average person is. But you carefully select your comparison group so that you can feel good about whatever you feel. And then if you have fringe attitudes, you spend your time not hanging out with people who tell you you're crazy. Instead, you carefully select a group of people who agree with you on that attitude. So when you all get together, you can agree with each other and validate each other. And I gave the example of the colleague who just needed his wife to say, gosh, you're right, that person is a terrible driver. And to a large extent, that notion is balance theory, the work of Fritz Heider, who suggested that what people strive for is a balance between various cognitions. And he sketched it out formally as triads. So if you have, say, 3 people, and they got to know each other because of their unusual names, they can each have a relationship with the other that's positive or negative. That is, A can like B, B and C can like each other, A and C can like each other, or any of those legs of the triangle could be negative. That is, A and C could hate each other. And what Heider suggested is that some patterns of liking and disliking are stable, and some of them are unstable, balanced or unbalanced, and that people prefer and strive to maintain balanced triads. So we'll start with the easiest one. Everyone likes A and B are friends, B and C are friends, and A and C are friends. And it's balanced in multiple ways. So you can imagine when A and B get together and discuss what they think of C, they would agree. So A would say, gosh, I think C is great. And B would say, I agree, you're right. C is great. Or when A and C get together and discuss B, they agree, and so on. And so this group works perfectly to validate everyone's opinion. That is, when you think, I don't know, I think C is great, I'm not sure. You would say, yep, I think he's great too. Now I'm sure. C is great. And it doesn't have to be people, it could be all sorts of things. So this could be you and your friend talking about some movie. I love that movie, your friend, I loved it too. And now you and B have validated each other's opinions about movie C. Let's do another one. Now you might wonder, is this one balanced? That is, entered some dislike into our triad. Is it balanced? That is, can people get together and validate their beliefs? So imagine A and B get together. What would A say about C? C is a bad person, and B would say, I agree. Right? So A and B can validate their opinion, their negative opinion now, about C. So it's balanced in that respect. Imagine now A and C this would be like getting together with a neo-Nazi. This is a neo-Nazi. And you say, what did you think of, where it would be, a pro-democracy person, a non-Nazi, Elie Wiesel. You would say, I'm not a Nazi. I like Elie Wiesel, spent a lot of his time after the war hunting down Nazis. Your neo-Nazi discussant would say, I hate Nazi hunters. And you would say, well, that makes sense. That in fact validates my opinion. I hate you, you hate him. That's why I like him. The enemy of your enemy is reasonably your friend. And in fact, that would be perfectly reasonable negative opinion validation. Because it should give you pause when someone from the other end of the political spectrum says that they really like something that you like. You would think, like, oh, wait a minute, one of us is wrong, because they should like things that I don't like. That is, this is a happy balanced state. So that one's balanced, and that one's balanced. Now let's move to dark. How about that? What happens when you and your friend B get together to talk about C? You would say to your friend B, hey, C's pretty nice. And B would say, ooh, I don't think so. C's horrible. And you would say, no, C is nice. And B would say, what? Horrible. And you would say, no, nice. And this would be weird and awkward for you, right? You go to a movie with your friend, that was great, your friend, that was terrible. You think like, something is wrong, right? That is, I wanted to validate my opinion about C with you, and you're invalidating. You're suggesting I'm wrong, but really, you're wrong. So that's awkward.
Can you repeat why,
Why this one was balanced?
why it's balanced?
So it's balanced, A and B get together and both agree we hate C. Right? I hate C, yep, you hate C, that's good. You and your friend do a neutral language. Right? So A and B can validate each other's opinion on C. And A and C, when they get together, it's reasonable that they disagree about A because A hates C. And you don't want to like things people that neo-Nazis hate. So this one, when A and B get together, they can't agree about C. It's exactly the same when A and C get together. They're friends. They can't agree about B. When B and C get together, they do agree about A, but they shouldn't agree about A because they hate each other. You think, wait, you like that, but I hate you. That doesn't make sense. Because I should dislike the things that you like. So this one is imbalanced. This makes people awkward. And any one of the pairs that gets together feels awkward about the third likelihood. There's one more possibility. What do people make of this one? As A and B get together, involuntarily again, they hate each other, and yet weirdly they agree about C. As you get together with someone you hate, and the person you hate says, wait, we share a hatred of C. You think, I don't want to share anything with you because I hate you. The stuff you hate, I should like. And notice because it's symmetrical rotationally, that happens when any two of them get together. Right? The enemy of your enemy should be your friend, but here the enemy of your enemy is your enemy. And so that one, again, is imbalanced. And because A, B, and C are fully exchangeable, that's the complete set of triads. Right? There's a triad with 3 negatives, 1 negative, 0 negatives, or 2 negatives. Those are all the possibilities. 0, 1, 2, or 3 negatives. So the argument is the ones that lack balance make people uncomfortable and they want to do something about it. The ones that have make people comfortable and they stick with them. So how would one exploit this? There are lots of ways that it has implications. So if you imagine advertising, there's you, there's a celebrity that you are positive about. Celebrity endorses some product. Says, I like that product, I stand next to that product, I wear the product, etc. You don't know how you feel about the product, but you pull out your Psych 104 notes, you check what would balance this triad, and the answer is a positive sign. Right? That is, if someone you like likes this product, then you have to like it. And that's in fact exactly why companies pay celebrities to endorse products. And it doesn't even have to be a celebrity, it could just be a beautiful person. And you think, I like beautiful people. Beautiful people endorse this product. Now I like the product. Now sometimes it goes wrong. Right? That is, celebrities sometimes suddenly go negative when they're caught in sex scandals or whatever it is. Right? So Bill Cosby spent a lot of time endorsing Jello Pops, was it? Right? The idea is everyone likes Bill Cosby. Bill Cosby likes, was it Jello Pops? What was it? None of you are old enough? Any of you know who Bill Cosby is? Anyway, he endorses some product, suddenly he goes negative. Do they still pay him to endorse it? Okay. Because now, if they paid him to endorse the product, what would happen? Oh, look, a serial sexual assaulter. He likes this product. I've made this negative for you. You don't like serial sexual assaulters. He likes the product, and so the argument is you would now dislike the product. Right? They would not pay him any longer to endorse the product. Notice if they really wanted to, they could still hire him as a spokesperson. He would just appear in their commercial saying, I hate these things. These are disgusting. And you would think, oh my God, I hate him. And he hates that product. I've got to buy that product. So you could do that if he goes negative on the product, but it would be a strange advertising strategy. It's not, incidentally, an advertising strategy unknown in politics. So in politics, in fact, you can pay people that you know will frighten voters to endorse that candidate. So you want to associate the candidate you don't like with someone that you think the voters don't like. And so there were lots of efforts of that during Obama's run for office to tie him to the minister that frightened people. Look, Obama's close with him and you hate him, so you should hate Obama. Though in that case, it didn't work. Okay, there are lots of other examples of this. So the classic one that many of you have experienced, and all of you will experience at some point. Is this positive? So far, right? You and your best friend, and then your best friend forever has a, let's say, new girlfriend that your best friend likes, and you don't. So your best friend weirdly has chosen a partner without getting your approval first. Is everything okay? It's not. Now you have three choices to restore balance. Option number one, come to like this person. My best friend really likes her, say, I should also like her. Hard to do that, right? If you don't like someone, it's hard to just make yourself like them. So, give up on that. You could think about option number two. That is, if you can't change that one, here's your next step. You say, the whole football team told me they liked your girlfriend. But again, as many of you have discovered, this is a strong bond in the first 6 months. one possibility, just wait 6 months. But what is the sad third option that's available to you? The what? Right. Harmony is restored. And now notice your best friend, ex, forever, and your girlfriend can get together and discuss how much they hate you. So this is a bonding experience for them now. And you think to yourself, it makes sense that they're together. He fooled me for a little while, but I saw through him in the end. He's really selfish. He cares more about love partners than life partners. And this is why, gradually over time, you lose all of your friends. That wasn't funny. That was very, very sad. So if you plot, for example, over time, the number of friends in your life, you're born with one, that's your mother. About 6 weeks later, there's your father, comes online. Gradually it goes up, there you are at about 21 years old, and then slowly you shed them all for reasons like this. Right? They like things that you don't like, and you have to give them up, and then you die finally with 0. Why is that funny? Isn't that roughly the saddest thing in the whole world? Anyway, I guess it's funny to you because you're about here now. So that's the optimistic outlook. Like, I have more friends now than I'll ever have again. Looking on it positive. Don't worry about it. So we've done product endorsements, we've done here why you lose all of your friends. You can do all sorts of other things in the same way. So let's do World War II. So there are 3 of the major powers in World War II. Great Britain, or UK. Are we allies during the war with England, United Kingdom, Great Britain? Are we allies with Germany? Germany and England, friends? Not friends. Is that balanced? Right. That's why World War II was such a big success. That's all. So Roosevelt and Churchill can get together over drinks, and they say, "What do you think of Hitler?" And Churchill says, "I really don't like him." "Me neither." "So we agree?" "We do. He's bad." And so they're happy. Let's do a harder group. So, USA and Germany, are they friends yet? No, this is still World War II. Germany and Soviet Union. Someone is speaking.
Yeah, before World War II, they made a treaty, and then Germany signed it.
So during World War II,
Oh, not friends.
very much not friends. So something like 20 million Russians died during the war. That is, there are more casualties in the Soviet Union than everywhere else. So now we have one leg left. Yeah, and this is pure balance theory. Is the U.S. a natural ally of the Soviet Union, communist? Right? They're not friends. Right? They're on the opposite side of basically all geopolitical conflicts, and for another 50 years. But balance theory, they're not going to change that one. Right? Do you become allies with the Nazis? No. You think like, okay, you killed 20 million, but now we're friends. That one's not going to change. So basically, balance theory forces that one to become positive. And that's why Churchill and Roosevelt get together and basically give the Soviet Union Eastern Europe 50 years after the war as a consequence of balance theory. That is, this one is force positive, by the strong negativity of those two. Now we'll do again going back a little bit in time. So we'll go pre-war. This may be before any of you were born. You can text your parents quickly and answer them. US and Iran. Positive, negative, negative, right? This was the overthrow of the Shah, the taking of the hostages, etc. The Ayatollah Khomeini Revolutionary Guard, distinctly not friends. Iran and Iraq, friends at the time. No, they were using chemical weapons on each other. Right? This was a long-standing war with massive casualties on both sides. Iraq and the US. Iraq under Hussein. This turns out to be a harder one, right? Because we didn't actually like him, but balance theory required, in fact, that we make that one positive. And this is why the first President Bush flew to Iraq, basically said, we're your friends, you can have a little neighboring country like Kuwait if you want. And so he took it, thinking that this positivity was enough. During the Gulf War, first Gulf War, for example, this one was force negative. This one remained negative because they're still gassing each other, and that's when there started to be a little rapprochement between US and Iran. That is, because they hated each other, and we were in actual war with them, that made that leg more positive. And essentially, it's just geopolitical balance there. Now, some of you may know, there's an entire discipline of political science. You can take courses in it, there are professors on it, and basically you can do it all in about 15 minutes with balance theory on the blackboard. I don't know what they do after the first lecture. Okay, so there's balance theory. Let's move on to another instance of these sort of group effects. So this is some work done by Irving Janis, who is interested in how major policy fiascos evolve or unfold. That is, there are lots and lots of decisions, and some of you may have made them, that are disastrously bad in retrospect. That is, you think, I shouldn't have done that, right? I shouldn't have turned off the headlights when I was driving my car at night, etc. That is, you can think, that was a mistake. There's a subcategory of these decisions that turn out to be bad that you realize were obviously going to be bad even in foresight. That is, sometimes you're unlucky, and sometimes you are actively foolish. And what Janis was interested in is this second type of decision. That is, when things go wrong, and people should have known that they would go wrong. If you're walking on the street and a safe slips out of a tall building and crushes you, you don't think, I shouldn't have walked down that sidewalk, I should have known better. On the other hand, if people say, careful, there are a lot of fallen safes here, and then you're crushed, you would, in your last moments, think, wow, that was a foolish disregarding of a caution. So Janis picked from history a number of these, and one of the most famous ones is the Bay of Pigs fiasco, which, for those of you who don't remember 1961 very clearly, involved an effort by the US with some Cuban expatriates to overthrow the early Castro regime in Cuba. That is, Castro had mounted a revolution against Batista, had taken over what used to be a friendly government, friendly to the US, and installed instead, just off the coast of America, a pro-Soviet communist government. And this was a serious threat to the US for all sorts of reasons, including, as later happened, that the Soviets could put nuclear weapons within just a short trip from US shores. So the hope was to, in 1961, overthrow Castro. And this event is called the Bay of Pigs fiasco, which tells you how it's going to unfold. This is a plan that the CIA hatched, so already you can tell it's going to be a fiasco, where they would train secretly Cuban expatriates in Guatemala. They would drop them off at night on the shores of Cuba, so US ships would drop them off. then the US wouldn't be further involved in the invasion. The thought was the Cuban army would quickly prove disloyal to Castro, would join the revolution, and they would overthrow him and restore democratic, or at least pro-US government in Cuba. The plan, which was taken over by Kennedy when he took office, involved top secret meetings with only his innermost advisors, which was critical that passing the song affairs of the foreign nation not be made public. And they launched the plan, and it was a disaster. It turns out that morale for the expatriates was very low, that is, they felt underprepared. They were sure they were insufficient in number, as in fact they were. So the government had to tell them at the training camps that they were just one of many groups that was being trained, and there'd be lots more people during the actual invasion. They actually dropped them off in a swamp on the edge of Cuba, so they couldn't make any headway at all. That was immediately, they just mired in the swamp. The very loyal and efficient Cuban army captured them, killed 200 of them, captured 1,400 of them, and the US had to pay ransom to get them back. It was also the case that some of the secrecy had been violated when the New York Times got wind of the story and published a front page article about the impending invasion. It's possible some of the policymakers should have known that their secrecy wasn't any longer preserved. And it turns out lots of people in the room, in Kennedy's top administration, had serious doubts about this plan. And the question is, how did they all let it go forward? When it was known the morale was low, it was known the Cuban army actually was loyal, it was known by some of them at least that it was a swamp that they were being dropped off in, that the secrecy had been blown, that one shouldn't be messing with sovereign affairs of a foreign nation in the first place, etc. And what Janus argued is that a process that he called groupthink took over. And essentially this is a direct extension of Festinger's social comparison theory. One of the things that happened was the pleasure of being in Kennedy's administration was so high, that is, the group was so valuable to you, that you would do anything in order not to risk being kicked out of it. That is, they called Kennedy's inner group Camelot, meaning basically you were like a knight of the round table. Kennedy was King Arthur, you might be Lancelot, Sir Galahad. And because this is such a noble and romantic thing to do, you don't want to be the person at the meeting who says, okay, everyone's on board with the Cuban invasion, and you would raise your hand and say, oh, I don't know, you guys seem kind of stupid to me. Here's why your plan is a bad one. Because at the next meeting, you would not be present. That is exactly the phenomenon that we had with Schachter's work on deviance would take place. So imagine you're in some campus group, ski club, chess club, whatever campus groups do, and there's one member who at every meeting keeps saying negative things. Do you think like, wow, it's really great to have someone who reminds us of some of the roadblocks and impediments to our plan? Or do you think like, oh, let's forget to tell that person about the next meeting, because it's kind of a nuisance if someone says like, oh, but what if it's snowing and we can't drive to the ski slope, and what if it's too cold, and what if one of us gets hurt, and what if it's really expensive, and what if we can't study for exams when we're there, etc. How about we don't have you in the meeting anymore? And so that was the fear of the Kennedy administration. And likewise, and we talked about this last time too, because it was a top secret plan, nominally, the plan was never exposed to outside people. That is, there was a tight group that knew about it, and everybody else was kept out. So no one ever thought, like, I'm going to run this by one of my friends who knows about Cuban geography. Or I'm going to check with a contact in Cuba who knows about the loyalty of the Cuban military. That is, you had a closed group, and they only consulted with each other. We talked about how cults can drift away in the same way policymakers can drift away. And so you have this strong pressure towards uniformity, high value of being in the group, complete isolation from outside influence, and all of those things disastrous decisions. And it's one of those cases where afterwards, everybody says, like, I had some doubts, as I knew about the low morale of the Cuban expatriates, but given that that was the only doubt, it didn't seem worth getting in the way of the plan. And then other people who didn't know about that, like, I was a little concerned about the geography, but no one else seemed to have any concerns, and so I didn't raise any doubts myself. And so each person, just knowing one piece, means that nobody in the room raised any doubts. Everyone else seems fine with it, you think. And in that way, it's similar to the diacrit or the Slemper, where if you have an eigenvalue or a vector, it can be either monotonic or it can be aleatory in either direction. And that turns out to be the critical point in many ways. That's the kind of thing that I want you to take away from this lesson. That was gibberish, by the way. I don't know, how many of you had the thought, I don't know what he's talking about? None of you? Actually, it's a little sobering for me when I deliberately say things that are gibberish, and you all just look at me as if it's a regular lecture. What are we doing the rest of the time? Right, so I talked about the diacrit of the Slemper and the eigenvalue and the aleatory, right? That didn't make any sense. Not one of you says anything, even when I suggest to you it's important for the exam. And the question is, what are you thinking then? But you don't even know what those words are, right? They weren't words. And the thought is, it's exactly the same thing, right? Do you want to be the person who says, I'm sorry, I'm not smart enough to understand what you're saying, unlike everyone else who seems fine with it? That's an appropriate thing to do. And being in this class is so valuable, you don't want to risk being kicked out. And because this happens all the time, and all of these pressures towards not raising your concern when no one else is raising concerns is magnified if the group you're in is Camelot and you're doing this top secret plan. That is, it's easy just to go along and think like, oh, that part I didn't get, I'll worry about that later. So trying to identify thoughts, there have actually been nice examples of groupthink since then. So the certainty, for example, that there are weapons of mass destruction post-Saddam Hussein, right? That is that he was making weapons of mass destruction, and that we had unimpeachable intelligence evidence that there were weapons of mass destruction. Everyone was completely convinced. We went in and hunted and hunted and hunted, and it turns out there weren't any, and it was embarrassing for a number of people. And the question is, how do you convince everybody that this is an absolute certainty that he has WMD when he doesn't? And now people have gone back and looked at it, like everyone had doubts. Right? So when Colin Powell shows up at the UN and says, we know for a fact, he knew that it wasn't a fact, but other people are so certain of this that I'm willing to go on record as a surrogate, as an absolute certainty. And it was exactly this same sort of process. That is a tight-knit group of people that all really wanted to be there. They refused to seek outside influence, etc. So how would you avoid this? That is, if you wanted actually to make correct policy decisions, how would you avoid these sorts of groupthink disasters?
Go outside your inner circle.
Yeah, so one thing is to every now and then just bring in an outsider who's not part of the group. So here's an idea. What do you think of it? And you could ask them not to tell anyone, for example. What else might you do? And this is the same way if you're in a cult, right? You think like every 6 months, I'm just going to check with a non-cult member. Like, here's what I'm doing these days. I've castrated myself. Next month, I'm going to kill myself so I can get on the tail of a comet. What do you think? So everyone I've checked with in the cult thinks that's fine. And your friend would say, like, no, right? Too bad about the first thing, but at least I tried to skip the second one. What else might you do?
Maybe you can have everybody write down big things and then put it in a box, something anonymously.
Right, so the fear is if you said, please feel free to raise concerns, it's not clear that's going to work. Right? Because people will say, like, oh, I don't want to be the one who's raising concerns. If you can do it anonymously, right? So you just write down, this plan is stupid, and you put it, and then you say, well, let's read everyone's concerns. Oh, everyone thinks the plan is stupid, right? And you say, now we need to rethink the plan. So anonymous ways work. Sometimes people have tried doing it with appointing a devil's advocate. The point of a devil's advocate is to raise as many concerns as they can about the plan. And the idea is everyone knows that you're a devil's advocate. Right? So they, okay, it's your turn to be the really obnoxious person and tell us all why we're stupid. And you say, okay, for the following 20 reasons. You think, like, whoa, actually, we are stupid, right? Those are real concerns. We'll talk later about whether a devil's advocate is going to be viable, but there are certain organizations that do that and deliberately do it to avoid groupthink. Right? You'd think if there weren't groupthink, you wouldn't need a devil's advocate. People would just say, if you have concerns, you would just say them out loud. The idea is lots of people have concerns, and you need an excuse to say them out loud. You say, okay, please say a concern. Don't just go along with a group. Don't be pleasant. Don't be nice. Don't try to be one of us. Take a moment and try to be really unpleasant by saying what you really think the problems with the plan are. So in fact, there are groups that have implemented these sorts of steps to avoid groupthink. And it happens in lots of things. Right? You know, when Coke is trying to decide, should we launch new Coke? Right? Obviously, it has to be secret because they don't want new Pepsi feeding them to market. But it turned out, again, lots of these things are disastrous, and they now implement plans. Having every now and then you bring in an outsider, you appoint devil's advocates, you have secret ways of sharing concerns, etc. Okay, let's turn to topic number 3. Risky shift. So again, this is an effect on decision making of groups. That is, what do groups do that's different from how individuals would behave? This is work actually of a man. That's not a description. That's actually Tate, who did this as his PhD dissertation. So any of you who are thinking of graduate school, you can aspire to this. What he wanted to know is, are groups likely to do riskier or less risky things than individuals? That is, you can imagine, instead of a surgeon deciding whether to perform some brain operation, there could be a group of surgeons. No individual should decide that. That should be a group of people who put a committee together to make this decision. There's some new marketing strategy. Should UCSD have a law school? Instead of one person making that decision, you'd appoint a little committee that would get together and discuss it. The answer is no, by the way. What effect does this have? Are people likely to make riskier decisions than if you put a committee together to decide it? Are committees risk-seeking, risk-averse? Anyway, that's Stoner's question. And so what he did was create various scenarios where people could indicate how much risk they would be willing to tolerate. So I'll give you an example of a scenario and then how he measured risk tolerance. Jean, the famous race car driver, is participating in the Toyota Grand Prix. Let me pause here and notice that one of the things that's not yet been monetized is product endorsements during lectures. So periodically I'm going to mention actual products, and that just means that they pay me slightly. Jean, the famous race car driver, is participating in the safe and reliable Toyota Grand Prix. With one lap to go, he is in second place behind his longtime rival. He must decide if he should settle for second place or try to slip by in the next corner. If he tries to pass and fails, he would drop back to a quite disappointing 5th place. If he succeeds, he would be assured of the victory. So here's our dilemma. Should he settle for second, or should he go for the win and risk finishing in 5th place? Imagine that you are in Jean's pit crew. What is the lowest chance of success that you would need in order to advise him to try to pass the leader? And I'll explain what that outcome measure is. So you have to imagine you're advising him. Would you tell him, go for it, if the chance of victory is 0 out of 10? That is, if he tries, he will certainly fail and finish 5th. So should he settle for second place, or have a 0% chance of victory and move back to 5th place. Or you might think, that's not enough for me. If he has a 1 in 10 chance, that would be enough for me to advise him. 10% chance of doing it, he should go for it. Or I would require 2 out of 10, that is 20% chance, etc. And it goes all the way up, for those of you who know math, to 10. Again, out of 10, meaning I wouldn't advise him to do it unless he was guaranteed a victory. If there's any chance of it failing, he should stay in second place. If he's guaranteed to move into first place, then he should do it. And notice these numbers are cumulative. So if you think he should do it if there's a 1% chance, you would think he should also do it if there's a 2% chance, right? That is, if there's a 10% chance, certainly do it if it's 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, etc., all the way up to 100. So there's some number, everyone presumably would do it here, right? If you're guaranteed a victory, go for it. There's some number where you flip and say, no, that's too risky, I wouldn't do it. Right. So now you should imagine, starting here, would you advise it there, 9, 8, 7, etc.? At what point would you say, that's too risky, I would stop there? So now you should all be thinking of a number. As imagine you are subjects in this experiment, and it takes place in one of 2 ways. So one way you come in, you're given this, and you're told, think about it, and come up with a number. In the other case, you're told, think about it, and then discuss it with the group, and come up with a group number. That is, we'll put this out to a committee of all of you, and you need to come up with a consensus, a number that you can all, at least for the purpose of the experiment, agree on. And he actually does it in multiple ways. So one way is you come up with a group number, but then you all vote again individually. So it's, does the participation in a group discussion shift your opinion, even separately from how it might shift the group opinion? Either way, turns out to be not the same. So now, you're all in the group condition. You have the dilemma. Should you all try to pass if there's a 10 in 10 chance of success? 9, 8, 7, 6. Should he try it even if he's guaranteed to fail? So you're somewhere in between 0 and 10. Good. So you should all now be thinking of a number, a whole number, integer, a real number, positive, between 0 and 10, inclusive. Are you all thinking of one? What's your number?
8.
8? And tell me why. Your number didn't appear on the board, so you just had to imagine it.
Just seems like a good number.
Round. Anyone else have a favorite number?
1.
1. Not round at all. So why 1?
Because if you have a chance of doing it, then just do it. Because if it works out, cool. If not, you can always try it in a different race.
So you think, so you're not saying go for it even if it's doomed. Saying as long as there's some chance,
Yeah,
you should
some
go for
chance of
victory.
doing
Anyone else? You two, by the way, aren't friends according to balance theory.
Maybe 5, because it's like the right in between, and I would be like, okay, we'll have a half chance.
So that just seems like the default. Like flip a coin. Anyone else? Only 3 of you have opinions. The rest of you are trying to figure out what the diacrit of the slimper is. So, I mean, arguments down here would be basically you win or you lose. Right? That's right. So you would say to your friends afterwards, like, yeah, I was scared of trying to win. And people say, like, how about if you're not a race car driver then? That is, the goal is to win. If there's some chance of winning, go for it. We call second place first loser. And then out here you'd say something like, I don't know, it's scary not to be on the podium, and then here at least you're on the podium. And so this sort of discussion unfolds, and then people vote again. Maybe we'll try a quick vote here by show of hands. You don't have to say scary things out loud. So I will start down here. So when I reach the level of risk that you would tolerate, that is when you think, yeah, go for it at that level, put your hand up, and leave your hand up, not forever, just till I get you there, because if you tolerate a 1, your hand should also be up for 2. That is, you would go for it at 20% if you would go for it at 10%. So as I sweep from left to right, all of your hands should be down, as they are now, and when I get over here, all of your hands should be up. Well, 1 hand per person, not all of your personal hands. All of you should have 1 hand up here. Unless you're really enthusiastic, then you can have them. Or if you're kind of mixed, you can put 1 hand up here and the other one up here. Anyway, you all follow. Let's try. How many of you say, go for it even if it's stupid? It's not a crazy position, right? You're in it to win it. Right? Either you try or you shouldn't be a reason. But anyway, no one is there. 10% is good enough. 20%, so 10% hand should still be out. 30%, 40%, that's probably the median there. 50%, they're the coin flippers. 60%, now we have those people. 70, people who like double round numbers. 90%, 100%. Like an attention check, so that you still don't have your hands up, because, oh, there it is, good, just in time. So, turns out people are slightly on the risky side on average. What happens after discussion? Turns out what happens after discussion is people move towards greater risk. So if you just get individuals to come in and do it, they would average around 4. If you get people to come in and have a group discussion, the group consensus, that is, if the group has to advance a position, it'll be a little riskier than 4, say 3. Or, if you don't even do the group consensus, you just say, everyone get in, discuss it, and then re-vote. People who change their minds will tend to change their minds in the risky direction. That is, most people don't change their minds. A few people will change. Very few people will change their minds towards greater caution. The dominant shift in a scenario like this will be towards risk. Go for it even when the odds are lower. And that's why it's called the risky shift. That is, it is a shift towards being risky. So far, so good. But now, as happens frequently in this class, it turned out to be more complicated than that, because Stoner had 10 scenarios, like the race car driver one, and for 7 of them, group discussions systematically moved people towards risk, and for the other 3, it systematically moved people towards caution. And it was consistent within a scenario. So if he gets one group in and they shift towards caution, other groups on that same scenario will shift towards caution. So it's not just groups do crazy things. It's that for some scenarios, groups generally shift one way, and for other scenarios, groups generally shift the other way. And just as we've seen before, this leaves you with a theory that groups can change the level of risk that people are willing to tolerate, and sometimes they increase it, and sometimes they decrease it. And again, it's a complete theory, but a useless one, because you need to understand why sometimes the shift that way, and sometimes the shift the other way. And I'll give you the kind of scenario where you got a shift in the other direction. Tim and Rachel are contemplating marriage. They've known each other for a little more than a year, and in spite of that, still like each other a great deal. I read this one. Recently, however, they've been dwelling on a potentially major difference of opinion about children. Tim is sure he wants kids. Rachel thinks she might not. Imagine that you're advising the young couple. What is the lowest probability of them coming to agree about wanting children, Rachel wanting them, Tim not wanting them, that you would require before you would advise them to marry? That is, if they have this major disagreement, and there's no chance that they would come to agree on this, he definitely wants kids, she definitely doesn't, you could say, yeah, they should still go for it, even if there's a 0% chance of them coming to agree. Or you could think, no, I require 100%. That is, if it's not certain that they will agree on this, they should not get married. Or you could have some number in between again. And so there's some number where you think, like, as long as it's about 90% they should go for it, because who knows, you can never have certainty. Or you could think, like, no, if there's any chance that the marriage could be successful in this way, then they should go for it. So again, you should be thinking of a number. And, as before, it should be positive, whole, real, integer, between 0 and 10. I'll give you a moment to think of a number. You thought of one? You're working on it? Everyone, please be silent. She's thinking. Now, have you thought of one? Is the pressure too much? Okay, so let's sweep across it. How many do you think go for it, even if you'll never agree? Because they're just going to fight over something, right? And it might as well be kids. Okay, how many people think as long as there's a 10% chance, go for it? Zeros should still have their hands up. Not personality zeros, people who vote for 0. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So there's our median, about 8.5. 10, 11. People shouldn't get married unless it's 110% sure. Okay. So in this case, people are more on the caution side. That is, presumably you think it's better for race car drivers to take risks than people going to the altar. And in a story like this, people offer arguments. Anyone want to offer an argument for why they picked the number they picked? So this could scar them. That is, if you take this risk and they don't get it, and then they actually get divorced, and then they bear those terrible scars forever. Recrimination and bitterness, financial loss. So imagine people say lots of things like that, and then you get to revote. People, in this case, move in that direction. And, in fact, notice this is turning gradually into something very like social facilitation theory. The argument is, in scenarios where the initial inclination is towards risk, that is, go for it, and people here generally were on the slightly risky side, those move further in the direction of risk. Ones where the initial inclination is in favor of caution, like don't gamble with a marriage, and things like welfare of children work the same way. So if I had some scenario like you are babysitting 2 young children, and there is a terrible storm outside, roads are flooded, some of them are washed out, but you're thirsty and would like a beer. What chance of making it back safely should you tolerate before you load the 2 kids you're babysitting into the back of the car and head out to the liquor store? Number from 0 to 10. Okay, so you're on the side of caution here. I mean, you can never really do 10. Right? All sorts of things can happen there. But people there, where it's the welfare of children, start out cautious and end up, I mean, it's hard to move beyond 10, end up even more cautious. In things like sports and stuff like that, people start out risky. The whole point of sports, gambling, etc., is to take risks. Group discussion moves them more in that direction. Why, you might wonder. I won't tell you. Until next Tuesday. When you hand in your papers, your reward will be a theoretical understanding of the risky shift.